Colomban Cri-Cri. Somewhere in France in the early 1970s, an engineer named Michel Colomban looked at the entire concept of a twin-engine airplane and asked a question nobody else in aviation had bothered asking. How small can this actually get? Colomban had spent his career working on considerably larger things, including the Concorde's older cousin, the Caravelle jetliner. Then he went home and, in his spare time, designed an airplane that weighed about as much as a large adult male. Empty, the Cri-Cri comes in around 170 pounds. It has a wingspan you could nearly touch both ends of with your arms out. It runs on 2 small engines instead of 1, not because it needed the power, but because a twin-engine airplane that small had simply never existed, and somebody had to be the first. He named it after his daughter Christine, whose childhood nickname was Cri-Cri, which is either an act of tenderness or the closest thing an engineer has to a joke. The whole aircraft could be built in a home garage, from a kit, for less than $1,000 in 1970s money. It first flew in the summer of 1973 and turned out to be fully aerobatic, capable of loops and rolls, despite looking like something a large dog could carry off in its mouth. The Cri-Cri did not solve a transportation problem. Nobody needed the world's smallest twin-engine airplane. It exists purely because an engineer who spent his working hours thinking big apparently needed a hobby that thought very, very small. Rutan Quickie Q1. Tom Jewett and Gene Sheehan came to Burt Rutan with a problem, and Rutan, by that point in his career, had built a reputation as the guy who solved problems by ignoring whichever design rule was supposed to make them impossible. What they wanted was an airplane that could fly efficiently on almost nothing, powered by an 18-horsepower engine, the kind of output you'd expect from a decent lawnmower rather than an aircraft. What came out of that conversation does not look like it should stay airborne. Instead of one big wing up front and a small stabilizer out back, the Quickie has 2 lifting surfaces of similar size, front and back. The front one isn't just there for steering, the way a small canard usually is. It's doing real lifting work, splitting the job in a way wings generally aren't supposed to split it, and the main landing wheels aren't tucked under the fuselage where you'd expect them. They're bolted directly onto the tips of that front wing, so from most angles, the whole aircraft looks like 2 separate kits that got mixed up in shipping. It first flew in November of 1977 and did exactly what it was built to do, cruising along efficiently on an engine that would struggle to power a chainsaw. Pilots who flew it kept describing the same sensation. It looked wrong sitting on the runway and felt completely ordinary in the air, which is close to the entire Rutan philosophy in one sentence. If the math checks out, the eye doesn't get a vote. 10 Wallis Gyrocopter. A gyrocopter is not a helicopter, whatever it looks like from a distance. A helicopter drives power directly into its rotor. A gyrocopter's top blades spin freely, pushed around by the air rushing past them, while a separate engine at the back does the actual shoving forward. It is closer to a kite that happens to be sitting on top of you than a machine hovering under its own power. It should, by most people's intuition, feel like cheating. It flies anyway, and rather well. One of the men who made the design famous was Ken Wallace, a former Royal Air Force bomber pilot who spent his later life building autogyros in his workshop, with the same seriousness other retirees bring to model trains. His aircraft, the WA-116, was tiny, home-built in every meaningful sense, and stable enough that Wallace was known for dramatic hands-off demonstrations. That stability, and Wallace's ability to fly it like nobody else, is why a film crew came looking for him in the mid-1960s. Wallace's autogyro became Little Nellie, the aircraft James Bond flies through a mountain gunfight in You Only Live Twice. Fitted out with fake rocket launchers and machine guns for the cameras, Wallace flew the Little Nellie sequences himself, effectively standing in for Sean Connery in the air because nobody else alive could fly the thing the way he could. What ended up as a few minutes of screen time reportedly took dozens of flights and more than 40 hours in the air to capture. Bond got the credit. Wallace kept building and flying autogyros in Norfolk into old age, and never seemed to mind. The BD-5J. Jim Bede had a pitch that sounded on paper like a scam. A real jet. Small enough to build in your garage. Cheap enough that a regular working pilot could actually own one, not just admire one at an air show. People believed him enough to send over 4,300 deposits to a company that had not yet built a single finished aircraft. What Bede hadn't quite worked out was the engine. Turns out promising a jet is easy. Sourcing a reliable engine small enough to fit one is a different problem entirely, and it's the problem that eventually sank his company into bankruptcy, leaving a lot of hopeful customers with half-built kits and no refund. The design underneath all that chaos, though, held up. The jet-powered version that actually made it into the air, the BD-5J, is still the lightest single-engine jet ever built, weighing in under 360 pounds. It's barely longer than a car. Its wings fold in for storage like something out of a garage sale, and it still manages to hit roughly 300 miles an hour, which is an absurd amount of speed to extract from something you could nearly fit in a moving van. Aviation nerds knew the BD-5J for its numbers. Everyone else knew it from the opening of a James Bond film, folded into a horse trailer, unfolding its wings for a chase that ends with 007 casually pulling into a gas station. The man who actually flew it, stunt pilot Corky Fornoff, had built the thing himself, mostly because there weren't many other people alive qualified to. Gossamer Albatross. Paul MacCready was an aeronautical engineer who'd already won one absurd prize for human-powered flight, a mile-long figure eight completed 2 years earlier by an aircraft called the Gossamer Condor. Having proven a person could pedal a plane around a closed course, MacCready decided the obvious follow-up was to pedal one across an actual body of water, specifically the English Channel, the same stretch Louis Blériot had flown 70 years earlier with an engine doing all the work. For power, MacCready didn't need an engine. He needed a very fit amateur cyclist willing to do something no cyclist had ever been asked to do, which turned out to be a Bakersfield resident named Brian Allen. The aircraft itself weighed around 70 pounds, built from mylar, polystyrene, and carbon fiber tubing stretched across a wingspan longer than a Boeing 737's, all of it wrapped around a two-bladed propeller connected by gears to Allen's legs. Just before 6 in the morning on June 12, 1979, Allen started pedaling at a rehearsed 75 revolutions per minute and lifted off from a field near Folkestone, England. What followed was nearly 3 hours of a man cycling through open air above open water, fighting turbulence, heat exhaustion, and a radio that stopped working partway through. With nothing between him and the channel but mylar and effort. He landed near Cap Gris-Nez, France, having covered just over 22 miles entirely under his own power, and collected a prize worth £100,000 for doing something the human body was never obviously built to do. Nobody has commuted to work this way. That was never really the point. Solar Impulse 2. Two Swiss pilots, Bertrand Piccard and André Borschberg, spent over a decade building an airplane on a premise that sounds more like a dare than an engineering brief. Fly around the entire planet without burning a drop of fuel. Not a short hop, not a demonstration flight. The whole globe powered by nothing but sunlight hitting the wings. The aircraft they built to do it looks like a mistake at first glance. Its wingspan stretches 72 meters, wider than a Boeing 747's, covered in over 17,000 solar cells feeding 4 electric motors. And yet the whole thing weighs about as much as a minivan, somewhere around 2,300 kilograms, which is roughly what you'd need if you wanted a 747's wingspan without anything resembling a 747's mass. The batteries charged during the day store just enough to keep the propellers turning through the night, meaning the plane, in theory, never needs to land at all as long as the sun keeps doing its part. That theory got tested brutally on the leg from Japan to Hawaii, where Borschberg flew solo for nearly 5 straight days over open ocean, sleeping in 20-minute intervals monitored by a ground crew watching his brainwaves for signs he was drifting into something deeper. He landed having set the record for the longest solo flight in history, by both time and distance, in an aircraft with no engine noise, no fuel gauge, and nothing beneath him but the Pacific. By 2016, Piccard and Borschberg had circled the entire Earth on sunlight alone. Nobody is boarding a solar-powered 747 anytime soon. That was never the argument. The argument was that the impossible math actually worked, and now everyone else has to explain why they're still burning fuel. The Flyboard Air. A former jet ski champion named Frankie Zapata built something that looks less like an aircraft and more like a skateboard that made a series of increasingly bad decisions. 5 small jet turbines, strapped underneath a board barely bigger than his own feet, fed by kerosene carried in a backpack on his shoulders. No wings, no fuselage, just Zapata standing on top of it, balancing the way a surfer balances, except the wave in this case is entirely his own doing. France's first real look at what this thing could do came at the 2019 Bastille Day Parade, where Zapata flew down the Champs-Élysées in front of the president and a lineup of European leaders, holding a rifle to make the military implications unmistakable. The country's own armed forces minister went on the radio afterward to explain that the device could serve as a flying logistics platform, or, just as easily, an assault platform. Nobody watching needed the explanation. The rifle had already made the point. 3 weeks later, Zapata attempted something considerably harder than a parade route, crossing the English Channel entirely on the board, timed deliberately to land on the 110th anniversary of the first airplane crossing of that same stretch of water. His first attempt ended in the sea, missing a refueling platform by a matter of centimeters. His second attempt, days later, worked. 22 miles, 22 minutes, one mid-flight refuel from a boat bobbing in open water, and speeds pushing past 100 miles an hour on a device with no seat, no harness, and nothing holding him to it but balance. Blériot did it in an airplane. Zapata did it standing up. Volocopter and EHang 216. A drone, in most people's heads, is still a toy, something small, remote-controlled, hovering over a backyard with a camera strapped to it. Two companies, one German and one Chinese, decided the same basic idea should scale up to something that carries an actual human being, and then built machines that do exactly that. The Chinese entry, EHang's EH216S, looks like a quadcopter that skipped leg day and grew instead. 16 rotors mounted across 8 arms, a cabin underneath just big enough for 2 seated passengers, and no pilot anywhere on board. No pilot is sitting inside it. It is designed for autonomous flight, supervised through a ground control and command system, with communications links sending instructions and monitoring data between the aircraft and the ground. It has carried real passengers on demonstration flights in China and several overseas markets, including Thailand and Austria. Germany's Volocopter took a slightly different approach, closer to a helicopter reimagined as 18 small propellers arranged in a ring, but the underlying pitch is identical. Electric power, vertical takeoff, an actual human sitting inside instead of watching from below. Neither of these is science fiction anymore. Both have flown. Both have carried people. EHang has even crossed from experiment into certification in China, while Volocopter has spent years chasing the city air taxi future in Europe. The part that still catches people off guard is not that a drone can carry a passenger. It is that somewhere one already has. The Flying Bathtub. A group of German YouTubers and builders who go by the Real Life Guys spent years building ridiculous machines, including large multi-rotor drones capable of lifting a human passenger, the kind of hobby that starts as a curiosity and ends with someone strapping a rotor rig to increasingly ridiculous objects. Eventually, they arrived at the logical, inevitable conclusion. If you are going to build a manned flying machine anyway, it might as well be an actual bathtub. What they produced was exactly what it sounds like. A real bathtub-style shell, fitted into a large multi-rotor frame, large enough and stable enough to lift an actual person sitting inside it, strapped in and wearing considerably more safety gear than bathing usually requires. It has no wings, no fuselage, nothing that looks like it belongs on a normal chart of aircraft categories. It is, structurally, a drone that happens to be shaped like plumbing. They did not just show it hovering in a field and call it done. In the video, one of the team climbs into the tub and flies it toward a local bakery to pick up something to eat. Floating over fields and roads like commuting had quietly stopped being a car problem. He lands, walks into the bakery, gets his order, and the whole outing became one of the more sincerely absurd home videos in aviation history. Nobody needed a flying bathtub. That was never in question. What the video proves, at least as a stunt, is that once you understand rotors, thrust, and control well enough, the vehicle can become almost anything. The tub was just what happened to be sitting around the garage that day. The SA-2A Skybaby. In 1952, a California aircraft builder named Ray Stitz got dared into a project by a fellow pilot who doubted it could be done. build a genuine, pilotable airplane smaller than anything anyone had flown before. Stitz took the bet seriously enough to weld the fuselage himself out of steel tubing and hand-build wings from spruce, ending up with something that measured just over 7 feet from wingtip to wingtip, barely wider than a couple of doorways laid end to end. He handed the test flying to Robert Starr, a former fighter pilot willing to fold himself into a cockpit that size and take an aircraft this small to speeds around 180 miles an hour. Landing something that tiny and that fast required a level of precision most pilots never need. Starr toured air shows with it through the summer of 1952, and by the time Stitz retired the airplane that November, the Skybaby held the title of the world's smallest piloted aircraft, a record that stood until 1984. The twist arrives with who eventually broke the record. It was not a stranger. It was Robert Starr himself, the same man who had spent that summer flying the Skybaby, going on decades later to design and fly something even smaller. The pilot who proved the Skybaby could fly ended up being the only man who could prove it was not the smallest anymore.